I'd like to go ahead and get started. My name is Ann Davis, and I'm excited to welcome you to the second annual State of the Environment Conference hosted by the Energy, Environment, and Land Use Program, or EELU as we call it, here at Vanderbilt Law School. I want to begin by thanking Kathy and Martin Brown, who through the Sally Schallenberger Brown Program Fund are making this conference and much of the other work of the EELU program possible. Thank you for your support, Kathy and Martin, and thank you for being here. The EELU program here at Vanderbilt is the 7th-ranked environmental law program in the whole country, And we are so lucky to have these faculty members as part of the Vanderbilt and Nashville communities. I want to thank them, J.B. Rule, Jim Rossi, Chris Serkin, and Mike Vandenbergh for their help putting this program together, as well as our extraordinary program director, Caroline Cox. And I want to give a special thanks to our assistant, Maggie Milam, for so ably handling all the details required to make this conference happen. Thank you, Maggie. This conference is designed to bring together the environmental community in Tennessee to facilitate collaboration, to highlight the work that is going on in our community, including by the EELU faculty, so that that work can be helpful to policymakers, and of course to educate our students and our community about these issues. Today we're going to begin with a report on the state of the environment, followed by a panel on the state of land use and conservation, and a panel on the state of water. There will not be a break between these panels. We will go directly from panel to panel. There will be a 30-minute break from 3 to 3:30. And after this break, we'll do our final 2 panels, one on the state of energy and one on the state of scholarship and innovation. And we'll conclude with a cocktail hour from 5:30 to 6:30, where I hope everyone can get a chance to talk about what they've learned here and meet some of the presenters. We do hope you can be here for as much of the afternoon as your schedule allows, but of course, come and go as you need to. I know some students will need to get up at various times and get to class. And finally, please note that your box lunches are compostable, fully compostable, and there are receptacles around the room and outside for them. I'm now going to turn this over to Mike Vandenbergh, who will moderate the panel on the state of the environment. Mike is a David Daniels Allen Distinguished Chair in Law and co-director of the EELU program. Mike.
Thank you so much. Let's thank Ann Davis, who really has put this all together. One thing I just want to say is that if you want a slow, leisurely program with lots of coffee breaks, do not ask Ann Davis to organize the program. We're going to be in a sprint here, but for good reason, which is there is an enormous amount of information that we want to try to convey. And let me start with that. From my perspective, rational risk regulation requires that we have the information necessary so we don't get distracted by shiny metal objects, so we focus on the things that matter over time. And Linda Bregan and I were both in the Clinton administration, and I think we were so overwhelmed with the extent to which the environmental system at the national level isn't driven by a full understanding of the environment and tackling the biggest problems. We spent several months after leaving the administration trying to think about what to do about that. And that, for me, produced, as you might imagine, a law review article, and it was called Ready, Fire, Aim. And that's my sense about how our system often works, right? We go doing things, and then we say, well, did we do the right things or not? And so what you're going to hear us talk about today is our first effort to try to walk that back a little bit. And what we hope will be an annual report. Think Tennessee is already ahead of the curve on having done this 6 times now in different areas. And we're thinking that Vanderbilt plays an important role. And I want to thank again Kathy and Martin for helping push us to reach out to the local community and not just be in these academic little stovepipes that we otherwise are in. And so we very much appreciate your thinking and support for our effort to try to do this. So what we're going to do today is we're going to try to essentially replicate what the Council on Environmental Quality was required to do by the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, which is to produce an annual report on the state of the United States environment. And as a part of a Paperwork Reduction Act effort in the mid-1990s, CEQ stopped doing that. So the United States no longer does this simple fundamental function. So our little goal here is for Tennessee and the Southeast and the region to replicate that process and give us a chance to think on a broader level about how we structure what we care about on the environmental front. To do that, I've been incredibly fortunate to have a team of highly skilled, incredibly motivated students to work with. Starting with Mariah Caballero. Mariah is a graduate student in human and organizational development and has a background in geography, which will come out in her presentation. And then Ethan Thorpe, who's a senior undergraduate as well. And the two of them have worked as a team. What you're going to hear from us today is just our first cut, our best first cut across multiple different measures. And I think what you're going to see is that we have something of a grasp on these things, but in many cases there are data gaps and areas where we need improvement. So we're doing this as a draft, and we'd like your input, the experts in this room, to help us produce another version, and then hopefully do this on a regular basis, either on our own or with Think Tennessee or in some other process like that. So that's where we are, and with that, let's start with Mariah.
Sure, yeah, and I just wanted to add that if y'all would like to read along, you can read a digital draft using the QR code with your smartphone. We'll also have it at the end, so if you decide you want to read it later, that'll be an option. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Ethan.
Yeah, thank you both so much. So we began this year's report on the topic of conservation in order to try to avoid some of the polarization that can afflict conversations about the environment. And so as Mike was alluding to, we believe that rational management is really the most critical environmental effort that we can make. And so conservation is really central to that effort, to making sure that the natural resources in Tennessee can be enjoyed for years and generations to come. This is especially important now as Tennessee is developing so rapidly. As you can see from this chart, the developed land has been increasing greatly across the state and especially in Davidson County, where the conservation can sometimes come second. But what we really wanted to avoid was the sole focus on. We wanted to ensure that people were aware of how our environment is being conserved and how those resources are being conserved. And in order to make sure that we achieved it and pursued it in as unbiased a way as possible, we used the definition that the U.S. Natural Resources Conservation Service uses for conservation, which includes the protection, preservation, management, and restoration of the natural environments and the communities that inhabit them. And so in Tennessee, one way that we have done this is through land easements. And so right now, just under 250,000 acres across the state are being protected and conserved through these easement programs. And in Tennessee, this is particularly important in our aquatic resources, where even though we don't typically think of Tennessee as a marine haven per se, we actually do have the most biodiverse freshwater fish population in the country. Unfortunately, in the most recent National Aquatic Resources surveys, which were conducted in 2017 and 2018, over 90% of Tennessee's waterways failed in at least one metric. And this threatens not just Tennessee's biodiversity, but the biodiversity of the country and the world at large. And so we hope that by focusing on conservation and making sure that these numbers and statistics are available to all stakeholders, that we can improve these conservation efforts and ensure that these natural resources are available for years to come. So one major step that Tennessee has been able to achieve in the past decade plus is a rapid reduction in carbon emissions, a reduction that has outpaced, especially since 2008, the rest of the nation and the southeast region. And so every year since 2009, Tennessee has actually emitted less than the 1990 baseline, which is a fantastic model even as it has developed. And we hope that this can serve as a model that other states in the Southeast and across the country can adopt. And it'll continue to make Tennessee more competitive to private sector and federal agencies as the demand for green energy and for environmental safety increases in the next couple years. One place where Tennessee still has room to grow, though, is in the transportation sector, which continues to make up over 40% of total emissions in the state. This has been a difficult trend to deal with, but with a faster EV uptake, which has currently been slow in the state, it's just under 0.2% as compared to a national average of 0.41%. So we are lagging behind the country on average by roughly half. And so transitioning to more EVs could help to improve the transportation sector and continue to help the strides that Tennessee has already produced. And as Mariah will explain a little bit more in the next slide, the greening of our electricity sector will also make EVs a more promising solution.
Yeah, and I'm going to stand, if that's all right. Thank you, Ethan. So in addition to climate, we also looked at energy, and one of the huge parts of energy is thinking about the generation by source. So we actually mapped out from 1990 to 2020 what our electricity is looking like. You'll notice that coal here in the orange is decreasing significantly, which is great. You'll notice that nuclear has increased quite a lot, and natural gas has also increased, and hydroelectric has stayed about consistent. And then you'll also notice here, kind of along the zero line, is the solar and wind. So we certainly have room to grow in that area. And one thing we wanted to note as well is that while coal emissions have decreased, and that is really great, we've also seen natural gas sort of increase. And while that's lessened emissions quite a lot, it's also infrastructure that we'll be tied to for the next 30 or so years, which could make meeting some of these future goals a little bit more challenging. So currently looking quite good, but we also wanted to look at energy into the future. So we used projections from the Energy Information Administration. And although Tennessee level state data is not available, we are able to look at the East, South, Central region, which includes Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. That's here in the blue. And then you'll notice that the United States is here in the orange. And this is projected into 2050, so when that sort of net zero goal is set for from the government. You'll also notice that our region is expected to be emitting 28% more tons of carbon per capita in 2050 than the national average. So as we sort of move forward and think about planning, this will be, I think, a really important aspect. In addition to electricity, we also looked at energy burden, which is the percentage of household income that is allocated toward energy bills. This is a map showing energy burden, which is in blue. So as that increases, you'll notice the blue. In the orange, we have household energy costs, and the sort of green is where the two intersect. So you see high energy burden and high energy costs. When you look at the southeast region generally, things are looking pretty good for Tennessee at least. So Tennessee has low per unit energy costs, which is great. That's 13th in the nation. But energy bills are quite high. We're actually ranked 41st in the nation. You'll hear more from Think Tennessee on that. But importantly, oftentimes Tennesseans are using far more electricity, which increases oftentimes their energy burden. So our range is about 2 to 5% in Tennessee, where in the United States the average is about 3%. And you'll notice here as you zoom into, this is Davidson County here, you'll notice that some households are really facing pretty disparate challenges in energy affordability. And that can be due to things like income, but also energy efficiency within one's home. So that's something to be thinking about as well. Moving into the air quality category, we looked at air quality using particulate matter as a proxy. So the first graph is showing population density by air quality. So low density counties in Tennessee have lower particulate matter. Higher density counties have higher particulate matter. That might not be totally surprising, but when we compared it to the southeast counties, you'll notice that counties like Charleston County and Fulton County, you'll see Davidson County is sort of right there in between the two. And when we zoomed out into look at major US counties, you'll notice that Davidson County has relatively high PM 2.5 that are comparable to Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, and New York County, New York, which are actually quite a bit more populous than Davidson County. So that's something to be thinking about as well. And one of the reasons why that might be the case is our transportation emissions. So emissions are much greater in the U.S., in Tennessee than those in the U.S. We compare to the national average. And the per capita transportation emissions are 7.43% greater than the U.S. average. In Tennessee, they're 16.17% greater. And in Davidson County, they're 62.82% greater than the national average. So as we think about, as Ethan said, sort of electrifying fleets and increasing EV uptakes, that's going to be, I think, incredibly important moving forward as well. And our last category was water. So we first assessed drinking water violations. We used health-based drinking water violations and community water systems, which are water systems that serve the same population year-round. So the first bar shows the United States, which is about 15%, I think, of systems are experiencing at least one health-based violation in the past 5 years. And the Southeast, you'll notice it's actually quite a bit lower. It's at 8.5% of community water systems have experienced at least one health-based violation. And in the state of Tennessee, we're somewhere kind of in between that. So about 12.4% of community water systems have experienced at least one health-based violation in the last 5 years. And notably, Davidson County has not had one health-based violation. So fill up your reusable water bottles. Things are looking good. One interesting thing we found as well is that smaller systems tend to have more health-based violations in the US and the Southeast. You'll see that's in the orange. But in the state of Tennessee, actually larger and medium-sized systems, those are here in the green and yellow, are actually tending to have more health-based violations as well. So it could be affecting more people on average. And the last thing we looked at for the water category was flood risk. So this is a map of flood risk that is ranked for the entire United States. Is based on a percentile rank. So 0 means very low flood risk, and 100% means that you're scoring in the top 100 percentile, and that's here in the orange. So in the Southeast, there's relatively high flood risk. About 15% of census tracts fell within the 90th percentile for flood risk in the next 30 years. However, when you zoom into Tennessee, it's relatively low. You're looking at about 4.8% of tracts falling into the 90th percentile for flood risk. And then Davidson County is sort of on track with that, where about 5.6% of tracts are likely or in that 90th percentile for flood risk. And one thing we also did was overlay low-income communities with 90th percentile flood risk, because we thought that that was important to understand. And in Davidson County, there are 4 census tracts that are both identified as low income and have about 90th percentile for flood risk in the next 30 years. So they actually all sort of lie around the Cumberland River and are currently being considered for development in the future. So as we think about that, that will also be incredibly important. Again, I wanted to say that if you all would like to read, there are paper copies, which we're really excited about, and you can read a draft as well. We are really eager for feedback, and we wanted this to be as like crowdsourced as possible. And so, yes, if you have any comments or suggestions, please do feel free to share them with us. And I'm going to hand it over to Erin. Oh, and I'll put these slides.
And one thing that Mariah didn't get to was that she and Ethan actually conducted a hackathon among students, and they had them come in and provide data and so forth. So what you're seeing here is the product of a broader-based student effort.
Yeah, both undergrads and graduates contributed graphics and tables, which was a lot of fun, and we are grateful for the EELU for purchasing pizza for that event.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Hafkenschiel, and I'm president of Think Tennessee. We are a statewide, nonpartisan public policy think tank, and we cover a wide range of issues, working on civic engagement, strengthening democracy, and supporting working families. I am so thrilled to be here today. I was here at the inaugural conference last year and talked with Ann and Mike about the idea of creating a state of environment report. And as you know, oftentimes really good ideas, people talk about them and are excited about them, but very rarely are they executed on within 12 months. So huge kudos to Anne and Mike and to Ethan and Mariah for getting this done. I'm really, really thrilled to see it. And I think you'll see that our State of Our State data is really complementary to the work of the State of the Environment report. I will just jump right in. I told you a little bit about Think Tennessee, but just wanted to highlight, while I have the opportunity, some of our reports that we've recently come out with. I'll talk quite a bit about our State of Our State dashboard, which we released in February of last year. We also released a transportation report. Transportation emissions are one of the key takeaways from Mariah and Ethan's work. And so we dive into why that's the case and what needs to be done to help improve transportation outcomes in Tennessee. And then our 2022 election after action report looks at voter turnout, competitiveness, and uncontested races in the 2022 midterm election. We have quite a few projects in the works, and I will touch a little bit on our county dashboard, which will be released at the end of February. We're working on a State of Working Tennessee report, a voter education series, and a criminal justice landscape analysis. So be on the lookout for those exciting projects that are coming. So jumping right in, as Mike said, Think Tennessee's State of Our State dashboard is now in its 6th iteration, and like we released it most recently in 2023. We take a slightly different approach to the way the State of the Environment report looked at this, and we really see this as a snapshot of sort of how Tennessee is doing compared to peer states. We rank Tennessee against peer states on 135 indicators across 11 categories. The color of the tile indicates the category it is in, not necessarily its ranking. And for the sake of consistency, a low ranking is always better. So you want to be in the top 10, you don't want to be in the bottom 40. In the energy and environment category, we have tracked 6 indicators, which you can see here. And I do want to note that these tiles represent the data that was available to us last February. So in many cases, it's 2019-2020 data. And I've included some updated data points because our ranking has changed pretty substantially, most notably in air pollution. And just one thing I want to say is that I think data is incredibly important because it helps you identify where our strengths are as a state, where we should be doubling down, and also where we're really falling behind. I wanted to pull up some of our infrastructure and transportation rankings because they're very related to a lot of the environmental issues that we're talking about. And since Mariah really highlighted that our transportation emissions continue to go up, even as our emissions in other sectors are starting to plateau or even decline, I think it's worth noting that Tennessee, not a surprise to many of you, is extremely car-oriented and car-dependent, as you can tell from our pretty dismal rankings here on the bottom. We have some of the most dangerous roads in the country. We have few options other than driving, and we are forcing people into car ownership even if they can't afford it, as you can tell by our auto loan delinquency rate. We will not be, this is something Mike and I have talked about quite extensively, we will not be able to reduce emissions from the transportation sector unless we focus on both electric vehicle adoption and uptake, as well as reducing vehicle miles traveled. And I'll just touch super briefly on our county dashboard. So we've gotten lots of really good feedback on our State of the State dashboard, but often people say, we feel like that state ranking is sort of hiding something that's going on at the county level. So at the end of February, we're in February now, at the end of this month, we'll be releasing our first ever county dashboard that will look at over 100 indicators across all 95 counties. And you'll be able to tell where counties are ahead of the game and where they are falling behind. In the energy and environment topics, our county dashboard will include renewable energy production, air pollution, environmental hazard and risk, and energy burden. So jumping into a few key takeaways, Tennessee definitely has some strengths in the energy sector, but lots of opportunity for improvement as well. As Mariah talked about, we have very, very low energy rates, but extremely high energy consumption. We rank 50th in the country in household energy consumption, and as Mariah said, 41st in average residential electricity bills. And I have a slide at the end that will talk a little bit around some of the energy efficiency and building codes opportunities we have to address that. We are really leading in green jobs. We were actually 15th when we did this ranking last year, and we are now first in the country, largely because a lot of our growth in small-scale nuclear and work that TVA is doing, as well as EV manufacturing. Mariah talked a little bit about solar energy capacity, and so just a couple things to point out. We ranked 27th in solar energy capacity in 2023. We were 11th in 2022, so we have come down. But at the same time, our total solar capacity nearly doubled last year from 411 megawatts to 953 megawatts. I think some of the big changes that we're seeing in the data are showing sort of how dynamic this industry is, and that even if we think we're doubling our solar capacity, other states are moving faster than us, so we are still following behind. And then worth pointing out our power grid reliability. This is another area where we actually have improved. We are experiencing about 3 hours fewer of outages a year than we were last year. But our ranking compared to other states has largely been stagnant because they are making investments faster than we are. Mariah talked a little bit about pollution, and Ethan talked a little bit about carbon emissions. This is definitely a complicated story. A couple of things I'll point out. You may remember that first slide I showed you. Tennessee was ranked 45th in air pollution, and now this year we're ranked 24th, which looks like a huge improvement from a ranking perspective, but as you can see, very little movement actually in the fine particulate matter. What's happening here is that states are actually, some of it is we've come down from COVID and we're coming back up, but states from a fine particulate measure, when you're averaging them out over a whole state, are actually incredibly close together. So a whole bunch of states are all ranked 24th, and so if you're seeing this tiny, tiny little change, that can drastically change your ranking. But overall, our air pollution is lower than it is across the country. And Ethan pointed out that we have significantly improved our CO2 emissions, but we're at risk of losing those gains as we move past the pandemic. Ooh. Okay. Just 2 more slides to go. Just wanted to point out some of our community environmental hazards, and these are both data points that we will include in our dashboard. Again, when you look at it across the state, our risk of flooding is about 13% in all counties, but it ranges from 4.8% in Madison County to 36% in Perry County. So the risk is substantially higher in some counties. And then similarly, the risk of a wildfire varies greatly. Most counties have have a 0% chance of wildfire exposure, but that risk jumps as high as 78% in places like Sequatchie and Campbell County. So one of the things that we've talked about is that while our energy costs are low, our household energy consumption can be quite high. And one of the biggest reasons why that's the case is our housing stock is pretty old, and we are significantly behind on our building energy codes as well as our enforcement. This is a pretty shocking stat to me. 74.6% of our homes were built before 2000. Tennessee was pretty late in adopting the building energy codes. I believe we adopted the 2008 building codes when I was in the mayor's office in 2016. Now we have the 2012 building codes for commercial buildings and the 2018 building codes for residential buildings, but both have been adopted with significant amendments at the local level, and enforcement is very spotty across the state. So this is a huge opportunity for improvement, both making sure that the new buildings we're building are being built more energy efficiently, and that we have really robust programs, particularly for homes with high energy burdens, like the Home Energy Uplift program, where we're making really important retrofits to those homes to ensure their quality of life, their ability to stay in their home oftentimes if they're aging in place, as well as reducing their energy burden. And that's it. Thank you so much for having me, and so thrilled to be part of this conversation.
So we're going to wrap up our panel now, and we'll move on to the next one. But as you can tell, we've got draft presentations of data. We're learning. If you're wondering sort of what are the values of doing things like that, if you think for a moment, we talk a lot about electric power rates, but what both of our studies suggest is that it's the cost of power or the burden of the power that matters ultimately. Most of us don't even know what our rates are, but we know what that bill is month by month, and that then opens the door to investments in efficiency and other things. Help us focus our resources. So to me, that's just one example. So thank you all so much. We'll turn it over to the next panel. And Ann?